welcome all, and welcome to Taking the Tradition On. So, right, there's a few more things that I have to say. So the first is that we are sponsored by Get a Word in Edgeways Festival, fantastic spoken word festival. This is their Zoom account, which is how I get to do the posh webinar thing. So I'm using their account. And thank you very much, Get a Word in Edgeways. Thank you also to Arts Council England. So this series of conversations, it's been every Tuesday at 8 o'clock for quite a long time now. It started off because I couldn't get to people to interview them to make podcasts, which I was due to do as part of my Arts Council project. And my whole project is about Duncan Williamson. I was very lucky to be Duncan's apprentice for quite a long time. And I inherited several boxes of reel-to-reel tapes from him. So I've had a project digitising those, listening to them, and just having a chance to revisit my apprenticeship, which really was about 25 years ago now, and just having time to think about what I learned and what I can learn now, because I'm at an entirely different point of my life. So these conversations are coming from that part of the tradition. They're about learning, about apprenticeship, they're about the Scottish travelling people and their culture. There has started to take little detours in all sorts of directions. And I've actually only got 2 more left after this. So next week will be a Jack Tales special, a 2-hour Kaylee. And the week after that, I'm going to invite you all to come, please, and to have it as a meeting instead of a webinar, and to have breakout rooms and just to ask you questions about what you think of the tradition and how you think it should be moving on, what you think we're going to see. So I'd really love it if you can come for that. But it's been so much fun doing it that I will then start it again in September, and we'll just explore traditions all over the world and whatever happens and whoever I can get hold of, and have lots more exciting conversations. So I think those are all my notices, which means we can get properly started, and I can introduce you to my wonderful guest. There are lots of people here tonight, Doc Rowe, and they're coming here because they are really excited to see you and to see what you have to say. For the few people who are regulars and maybe don't know who you are and have come because they've come to these conversations and are willing to follow me on the wild and weird journeys that I take them on, Doc Rowe is an archivist, and you have been collecting recordings for over 50 years. And I mean, lots of people kind of know, they've seen you around festivals with mini disc recorders, tape recorders, video recorders, notebooks, and recording things, but they might not know exactly what you have and what you do. So can you just describe to us the archive that you are currently curating? And I know that you've got like 42 hard drives that you're sorting out.
Yeah, I take issue, first of all, as an archivist. I'm an accidental archivist. I just seem to have stumbled across this material over the last 50 odd years, and I've now got a responsibility of keeping it and sharing it. So I always say I'm a kind of accidental archivist. The archivist has come from, actually conserving and putting the stuff in the right order. And in a way, I'm quite thankful for the lockdown, because I've stopped traveling around the country recording. I've stopped going off doing talks. So that whole time has been spent, as you rightly said, fumbling through 42 hard drives, sorting out and relabeling and making sense of it all. So just housekeeping. But what was the question?
Well, what is the archive? What have you got in it? What have you been collecting?
Oh, sorry. I suppose start from the beginning. I mean, I grew up in Devon, and I was, quite passionate about politics and arts and all sorts of things. And at one point, I remember getting very angry at the BBC because they were telling me that all the dialect, the songs, and local speech had died out. And although I was brought up by my mother, who came from London, hence this accent, I still didn't have a broad Devon accent. And I was very cross because down the road I knew there were people who had a very broad Devon accent, sang the songs, danced the dance. And so these days you'd write a stiff letter to the BBC. In those days it would be rather like writing to the Queen. You just didn't do it. So what I did instead was, with a notebook originally, started making notes of all these things that I found. And I think 1963 I bought myself a tape recorder. Oh, a day. A little earlier than that, I bought myself a tape recorder, which was purple and grey and made in Taiwan. And I discovered after the first recording that there was no drive belt. It just relied totally on the power of the battery. So every time you played it back, it sounded very fast because there was no control over the tape. But yeah, I suppose I was looking at what we now say is vernacular art. So it was people's art. I also, also at this time, I went to art college in 1961. And at art college, of course, as people probably know, that your world opens up. You explore all sorts of things. There's no constraint, if you like. And it coincided with the second revival, the folk song revival, the club revival. And I got involved in that, of course, sang songs, some of the songs that I collected from Dartmoor, and it went from there. So I never actually set out. I think that's the important thing. I never actually set out to do this. It actually suddenly in 1979 I realised I had all these boxes of tapes, cassettes, open reel tapes actually, and photographs, and people people like Andy Cronshaw, who you mentioned. I mean, he's been one of those people that has made me aware of the importance of some of this stuff. I was just collecting it for myself, and then suddenly realised that other people were interested in this material. And in fact, in some cases, because it's always been accident, I've never set out to do it, and I seem to have been in the right place at the wrong time or the wrong place at the right time, and I've just come across people. And also, I think key thing is that because I don't drive, it's all been done by public transport. And it's extraordinary who you meet on buses and trains and bus stops. And when you explain try to explain what you're doing, inevitably it says, oh, you must go and meet my grandmother or grandfather because they used to do X, Y, and Z. So there's been material like that just dropping my way throughout the 50 years. And so in consequence, by the day at the moment, I'm changing the amount of material I've got because I'm checking more thoroughly. But there must be about 20,000 hours of audio recording. Um, there's there's about 250 open reel tapes. There's around 5,000 cassettes. There's 58, I can be exact, 58 mini discs, and about 100 DATs, which are all at risk as the dropout on DATs is considerable. That's not to mention the newer formats, the digital, the mini discs, the mini DVs, videotape. So there's probably, I mean, there's 1,500 hours of film on VHS on old analog, and then since then I've been shooting on digital. So who knows?
Wow. It's just vast, absolutely vast, and it's and I suppose you would say that's all traditional material, would you?
No, not necessarily. I mean, one doesn't sort of say yay or nay to things. I mean, if it's all people's art. I mean, I'm always overjoyed, putting it crudely, that people get off their backside and do things. Despite the mass media that we've got now, the creative side of things is terrific. Well, I often get people saying, particularly on the seasonal events. I note that I don't like calling them calendar custom because that smacks of old folklorist style of collecting. But the seasonal events, people say, of course, you're a purist. You wouldn't like these things that we invented 10 years ago. I mean, far from it.
Well, I've seen quite a lot of things that have been invented less than 10 years ago, so I wouldn't say that. But they're things, I suppose, what you collect, if they're not traditional, they're things that might become traditional and that are what sort of cultural celebrations.
Well, you could say that. I mean, I'm not sure which avenue we're going down there. I think that's going to take another 2 hours and we go off beam. But yeah.
Well, I suppose I'm coming from a point of view of just trying to give, because I've got quite a few storytellers on here who maybe haven't come across you. I mean, I've seen you probably more at folk events than specific storytelling events. I mean, obviously some storytelling events are at folk festivals and more folky events, and that's how I came to storytelling. But it's sort of, storytelling has become quite an interesting sphere in that there's a lot of people who are interested in storytelling that have never ever been to a folk club or a folk festival, and have maybe come in through art centres or libraries, who have a different take on it. And I know that you've done quite a lot of stuff at art centres as well, but you just might not have crossed paths. So I'm trying to give a bit of a view of what you do. And I think a lot of people, me included, have a little window at the events that we've seen you at. And so we know you do that, but we don't know about all of this stuff all everywhere else that you do. So it's just sort of trying to get a bit of an idea of where you're coming from and actually what's in that archive, really.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's, apart from the audio, the video, and there's also a massive ephemera as well, because of my early interest in politics. You know, I was out campaigning with CND in the early '60s, and learning songs. Of course, that was you know, extraordinary. The CND, actually, the working people took up the songs and created the songs as well. So I've got two folders, one 1959 and one 1961, which is all the newspaper cuttings, including a voucher for me to sleep in Farringdon Village Hall on the Saturday night on the walk from Reading to London. But anyway. So there's posters, there's ephemera, there's nearly, well, there's 17,000 books and pamphlets, you know, so published things.
Wow.
Again, you might be interested. I mean, there's about 1,500 LPs, all autographed by the performers, and this was the collection left to me by a family of someone who died some years ago. So they're all a bit odd. I grew up listening to 78 records. I had 1,800 when I was 11, and 11 gramophones. And
You must have had really nice parents.
I think that's where it started, really. My father was at war, went to sea aged 11 in 1921, and he remained in the Navy until 1952. So I was born at the end of the war, and so my vision of my dad was a senior service packet sailor. I thought he had a pipe and a beard, and so I used to draw him as a pipe and a beard. And then I met him. He came out of the Navy in 1952, 53, and it took a lot of. He had a broad Devon accent as well. My mother came from London. Sound like a song. So I was brought up, my received speech was from my mother, you know, a Londoner. But when Dad came home, he took a real broad Devon accent, which was fabulous. But he then, because he hadn't driven, another reason why I probably didn't learn to drive. You don't drive a car at sea. You don't learn to drive a car, especially when you're aged 11 going to sea, I guess. And he came out and got various jobs, and one of them was actually in a furnishing store. And his job on a Wednesday, I always remember, was to clear the auction room. And Dad, having grown up, I sense, with no family, he saw all these records, all these clocks, all these sofas, all these armchairs being thrown away because nobody wanted them. I think he found that a shame. So we had a constant change of furniture, and I had a constant addition to my 78 collection. And I remember I used to get my sister to wind it up, you know, so I very rarely wound up the record player. I would snap my finger or some such, and she would wind it up, which was great. So my early recordings were, let me think, when it's midnight in Italy, it's Wednesday over here, and loads of Frank Crummett's songs. And I suspect that's also what made me interested in the folk song much later, you know. But anyway, I digress.
Well, yeah, I'm going to it's really interesting, but I'm going to fast forward you slightly, because obviously I'm particularly interested in storytelling. I'm interested in ballads as well, but I do want to get to the point where you start meeting storytellers. So from CND protests and lots of 78s, where did you first come into contact with storytelling? Because for some people I think it was just part of their lives, but for an awful lot of people, I mean, certainly you know, when I first discovered storytelling, I didn't know storytelling existed. I thought it died out. I thought it wasn't around anymore, and then suddenly that there it was. There was this kind of underground scene that kind of, you know, you either were lucky and bumped into, or it was just completely hidden.
Well, I think, I mean, we're talking about performance storytellers these days, but in the early days, I mean, Bob Can
Well,
on
I'm not necessarily talking about performance storytellers. I'm talking about any sort of storytelling, really.
my early meetings, people on Dartmoor who told stories. Bob Can was wonderful. He's known as a melodeon player and a singer, but has some great stories and monologues as well, which also fitted into that. And indeed, in the folk clubs in the early '60s, we had the occasional person coming in telling stories. Um, they didn't necessarily see themselves as storytellers. You know, it was just a natural communication, really. They wanted to contribute something, so they told a story. And I guess my first connection, really, because I know you're interested in the Scottish, was in the early '60s. I met Hamish Henderson in Padstow in Cornwall on May Day. He used to go every year, and he spent most of May Day outside the pub on the phone, holding it up to play back to his family and friends in Scotland. And we met very early on, and we must have shared interests. So from 1962 onwards, Hamish was a very dear friend. And whenever I went to Edinburgh, you know, I would call in and see him. He lived in this flat that was interminable stairs or stone stairs all the way up, and he was not getting any younger. But we had lots of with kindred spirit, I think was the word, and you know, we actually got on extremely well. And I have hours and hours of Hamish talking about, you know, particularly the Stewarts and Alan Lomax, who I met later as well. So we've got quite a lot of you know, sidelong story on that, and
It's
it wasn't.
interesting, sort of you recording Hamish as well. I mean, so for people who don't know who Hamish Henderson was, I mean, he was an amazing Scottish collector, and a supporter of traditional folk arts in Scotland, really. And he had quite a posh accent, didn't he? He did have it was a more of a
Well, he had a Scottish.
English Highland Scots accent. He worked for the BBC a little bit. Um, and I only got to meet him a couple of times, but he was instrumental in the work at the School of Scottish Studies and the archive there.
Well, I mean, he actually set up the school, really. I mean, I think the school treated him abysmally at the end, you know. But no, he was an extraordinary individual. I mean, I thought the other day that it may have been him that introduced me to the Stewarts, but in fact, it was Charles Parker, the radio producer, who I met again early 1963, and he I mean, one day he was saying to me about this amazing woman. You really must film her. And in those days, I was probably filming on an 8mm camera, so I don't know why he would think that I would want to film. But he wanted me to go and film these lips of this amazing singer storyteller, and it was Belle Stewart. And it was a couple of years later before, and with trepidation, I met Sheila and introduced to her mother, and I was waiting to have this extraordinary vision that Charles had about Belle Stewart's lips, but no, they were amazing. But maybe Charles was on something else at the time. But yeah, so got to know them very well. And I mean, I did a lot of work with Sheila in the end, and we'll perhaps talk about that later because there are some.
How do they feel about about being recorded and being approached to be recorded?
Well, I never approached anyone really. I just appeared. I had, I mean, one would say, well, you wouldn't actually say, do you mind if I record you? Because natural consequence of, you know, your personal, what's the word? Shyness, I suppose, even if it's imposed, you say, oh no, you don't want to do that. So I learned very early on is just simply to say, is it okay if I record? Because and most people would say yes, because they didn't have to make a decision, say yes or no. I mean, I don't think I'm not sure I was going around recording everything, but some people out there might say yes, you were. I didn't notice. Almost like the cameras, for instance. I would be adjusting the aperture 1 stop or 2 stop as the sun went in and out. It was almost like adjusting a hearing aid. Really, it became second nature. So I do remember that Sheila once said to me that Philip Donnellan, the television producer, had once said to me, once said to her that he ought to meet this fellow because he goes around recording people, but you wouldn't know. He's not intrusive like everybody, thrusting a microphone in your face and all the rest of it. And he's here tomorrow, so I'll introduce you. And he said, he's called Doc. And she said, oh, Doc Rowe, of course I know. So learned a lot about myself via Philip Donnellan from Sheila. It was quite slightly embarrassing, but reassuring, because Philip was a fantastic television producer, but he was very much ex-army. And I remember once walking down a corridor in the BBC with him, and I suddenly realised he wasn't listening, so I just stopped, and he trundled on about 12 feet, and then looked round and said, "What's up?" And I said, "You're not listening, Philip." It's very brave of me at the time. I said, "You're not listening." "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you're not really listening, so I'm not going to tell you anything." "No, I didn't know. Real apologies," but it was a bit like that. Anyway, this is a direct dialogue. Everyone knows that I go off at tangents.
But they're usually quite interesting tangents. So you met Hamish at Padstow,
yeah,
and then you sort of stayed with him when you went up to Edinburgh. But it's Padstow and Devon are quite a long way from Edinburgh, and there's quite a lot of folk traditions, events, festivals, singers, songwriters in between. So how did was there a specific thing that got you to Scotland in the first place?
No, I hadn't been there. That was all.
Yeah.
So I went. I think probably the first real visit was to the Buryman in South Queensferry. And so I regularly go there now every year, the second Friday in August, and a man gets covered in burrs, prickly burrs, and walks painfully through the streets for 11 hours, drinking whiskey that people bring out of the house and give him money. So I've been doing that for 40 odd years, I think now. In fact, I've become the official dresser, because I've outlived three or four dressers of the Buryman. And I had a call 2 days ago from the current Buryman, Andrew Taylor, who said that he's expecting to go out because there would only be 3 or 4 of us going round, and his wife would make sure that the whiskey glasses are all carefully sanitized and would only be handled by her and us. But I won't be going. It's too soon, as I'm, what's the word? Old and vulnerable.
Right. Well, now I have got a little clip now. So Doc Rowe sent over me some clips today. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight. I've done my best. We had a tech rehearsal last night, and we thought, be really easy. We'll just do a bit of screen sharing, put things up, and discovered that the sound really wasn't great. So I've done everything that I can to sort out the sound. And so it's the best way is to play them through YouTube. So we can play just a little clip here, and this will be my first sort of try at doing this. And you'll just have to be really kind and see if we can find the Buryman. So here he is, just hiding in there. And let's see if we've managed to overcome the sounds and if it's fairly reasonable.
It's not like I don't consider my role as the Buryman as in some way artistically linked, but it's something that I'm interested in, but it's separate. People were saying to me,
Sorry.
do you regard it as a kind of, you know, like performance art or something like that? You know, and I suppose like you could perhaps see a tie-in with it. I don't regard it as that at all. I think it's much more important than that.
I think it's just important to have a bit of showing you sort of things that you do collect. That this is the pain of having to do it through YouTube. We get better sounds. It's going to be just and I was a faff coming in and out. I'm afraid I shall do my best to be as quick as possible. I hadn't realised that all of those were like actually spiky burrs.
Yep, I mean this is one of the problems that the current Buryman and family haven't quite understood. I think how one assembles the burrs. They over the past 20 years they've been making the patches, as they're called, putting these nature's Velcro buds together, but they come back as A4 size. So you need about 27 of them to patch the Buryman. But in the earlier days, the patches were put together larger than that. And I've only recently realised that it's because of the newspaper sizes. Tabloid newspapers are a lot smaller than whatever the format is. So we've been trying to use wallpaper and all sorts of things over the past 3-4 years. Anyway, I could spend an hour just talking about the Buryman report.
I would love to hear about the background to that, and I think you probably could spend an hour, and we may be
collecting the burrs in a few weeks. Jill and I have got a replica of the Buryman, a full size one in Jill's shed, because we made one for an exhibition God knows how many years ago, folk archive exhibition that Jeremy Della was putting together. And our original model is somewhere in between India and Japan at the moment in a British Council exhibition, and we missed it so much we built another one. And our intention this year is, because of the lockdown, we're going to strip all the old burrs off and put some new ones on, because we're probably the only house in North Yorkshire that cultivates burrs.
Have your own private ceremony. People are finding it a struggle to think of you as being old and vulnerable, Doc. They're thinking you should go, but I think that's your decision. And yes, but I'm glad Laura says that the sound is okay. So I'm glad that the sound is all right, and finally when we're sharing things. So hopefully we might get to share some stories soon.
I must mention that the quality of the image has been much reduced, because I had to send it to you last night. So the original, of course, is much sharper and less grainy, and possibly the sound is much better. But because I've always prided myself on good sound, I think if you're recording a performer of any kind, musician, singer, storyteller, you really do need close perspective, so you get exactly, what they're saying, the breathing patterns and everything. I think to actually record somebody from 30 feet away and put it on YouTube is not good. So I say I've always prided myself on the sound, and it takes a bit of work and effort sometimes, and anyway. I digress.
Well, I think it takes a lot of work and effort, and I mean that's what you're saying. It's interesting that people are saying, "Oh, you managed to be quite unobtrusive," because the thing is, yes, you managed to be unobtrusive, but you also won't be put up with being pushed back. That you are right at the front, and unlike a lot of cameramen who kind of can destroy an event because they get in between the performer and what's actually going on, you're still at the front and in the action, getting the quality of the sound and getting it so that it's good for people afterwards as well as people who are there. And that's a very tricky thing to do.
Well, I am also small, and I can I weave in and out of crowds. I've learned, actually, it's very interesting over the years, because a lot of these events are very, very crowded, and it only takes a few minutes, 10 minutes, to see the rhythm of the crowd. And quite often I'll go in the opposite direction to that which I want to go, because it's quicker to get round than trying to go through the crowd, And obviously, because I do serial collecting, I'm at some events year after year after year. I'm there every year. Locals know me, so I can quite often wander through with locals. And also I know the back streets, of course, I can dash through. So there's nothing clever about it at all. But you're absolutely right. The media just think they're there for them. And one of my other proudest times was we did. I initiated a film with Channel 4 called The Future of Things Past, and we filmed 19 of these seasonal events. And we were in Padstow, and at 11 o'clock, one of the local lads came up and said, "Doc, I thought you were filming us today. You know, when are you going to get started?" And I said, "Great. We've been filming since 7 o'clock this morning. And remember that, because that's exactly what film people should do. You know, you shouldn't notice them at all. Behave right." So, but I actually added to that, there was an exhibition in Stowmarket a few years ago that Simon Costin curated. And he came to the archive, and he took loads of what he thought was redundant equipment, you know, old cameras, tape recorders, open reel tapes, and all sorts of things. And when I got to the exhibition, these were all displayed in cases, and it was almost like a shrine, you know. And I'm thinking, but I'm still very much here. But in the corner was a mannequin which had headphones, one of the huge video recorders that I used to use on the shoulder, a huge battery pack, a huge recorder, another bag with extra tapes in, another bag with extra batteries. And it was just a noise. It was just this human being with things coming out of him in all directions. And I was really worried and upset. I thought, God, how did people tolerate? So this was April. A week or so later, I was in Padstow itself, and I mentioned this to a friend over a pint, a Padstonian, and I said, it was terrifying to see this. I mean, how the hell did you put up with me? And he thought for a moment, and he said, well, we thought you were a bit odd. So that's okay then.
Oh, I love it. But it was like that. I mean, when I talked to Linda Williamson on here, I mean, she described when she first went to Duncan that she just, you know, she was very determined that she wouldn't drive, that she would, you know, arrive on foot. And it was really important for her that she arrived on foot and walked and probably travelled to see them and didn't, you know, drive it. But she'd be there she'd get a bus to about a mile away, which is the nearest stop to the campsite, and she'd have this rucksack that was just like full of really massive batteries and spare tapes, and she's very slender and very small as well, and kind of like hike with this huge backpack and the kind of the portable ewer and everything up to the campsite. And it was a lot of gear. And of course, I mean, it's just incredible now you can just hold a tiny little thing in your hand, the palm of your hand.
I mean, I found a photograph of me on Exeter Station, and there's two flight cases, one very large black soft bag, presumably with clothes in, a kind of duffel bag affair, and a camera case. You know, I mean, it was about 8 items, and that's probably why I'm still very short. You know, I used to walk around.
Stunted.
And you know, places I chose to go were small villages with no transport. So I thought nothing of walking 5.5 miles, 6 miles to get somewhere. Did the job, you know, met local people, chatted, took the photographs, recorded the film, and then left at 1 a.m. and made my way back.
You were very lucky to find any public transport at 1 o'clock in the morning.
There wasn't any. In this one particular place, I walked for 5 hours through the night. I tried to sleep in a barn. It was no use at all. And then I carried on walking. And about 3 a.m, I was heading from Kilburn in North Yorkshire to York, on my way back to Sheffield, where I was living at the time. And about 3 a.m, this truck stopped and said, "Where are you going, mate?" And I said, "Well, off to York." And he said, "Yeah, I saw you 4 hours ago. You know, I wondered where you're going." So I should have picked you up then. But yeah, anyway, I mean, those are other stories. Going back to storytelling. Well,
I suppose the travellers as well. I'm quite interested because you've been recording and watching Travellers over I think quite an important time, because I think, you know, there was that time in the 60s where they were sort of discovered, or certainly they started to be maybe a little bit more valued, and you had Jeannie Robertson coming out, and I think maybe she was the one that was best known and first known perhaps, and then the other Travellers coming out, and there was a generation that really kind of opened up to the world. And I would love to know kind of your first encounters with them and how they changed over that time.
Well, most travellers were not travelling, of course. They were housebound. There was an experience. I went with Philip Donovan to, I think it was Darley, and we went to visit a well-known traveller. Knocked on the door of the house we had the address of, and the person said, "No, they're not here. They left, so many months ago. Oh, what a shame." Went to leave, got halfway down the drive, and they said, "You'll see them at number 7." And so there was this estate where travellers were on, and they were constantly changing houses. So it really said it's in the blood. They can't stay too long in one place. But obviously the Stewarts were at home. I mean, Duncan was a rarity, of course, wasn't he? I think probably I've got a sense that he probably deliberately did that as well. It was romantic's the wrong word, but I mean, what do you think?
He was stubborn. I think a lot of them were stubborn. But I mean, also think Linda really wanted to experience that life when, I mean, well, he was still traveling when Linda met him anyway, but she was certainly interested in carrying that on for a while. But I don't know. I mean, this is why I'm asking, because I wasn't around then. I mean, it's a bit that I kind of know bits about, but not as much as I would like to. So I got the impression that a lot of them had council houses, but they were being there for the winter, and then they would take off for the summer and kind of use that as their winter ground, which was a fairly traditional way of doing it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, a lot of them went to Ireland as well. But, I mean, Jane Turriff, who I recorded over, God knows, 15 years, I suppose. She was an extraordinary character. And, I mean, shall I tell you about Jane?
I mean, I don't know anything about her. I'd love to hear about her.
Well, Jane Turriff, well respected amongst the again, travelling community, but she was disabled. And it's a weird thing that she was invited to come to the National Folk Music Festival several times, and I think she appeared on the bill once or twice, but never arrived. And all the Scottish friends were saying she's wonderful, amazing woman, all the rest of it. We really should get her down. Anyway, I phoned her up, because she was obviously constantly ill. I didn't realise she was disabled until I met her, but she was constantly ill. And I said, I phoned her up and chatted for, nearly 2 hours, I think, in the end. We were close friends by the end of it. And I said, look, I'll tell you what I could do is, if you're invited next year, I'll quite happily come up and film you singing some songs. And if you can't make it, I can show the video at the National. And she thought that was hilarious, lovely cackling chuckle. That was great. So over the months, she sometimes phoned me, I sometimes phoned her, but we got very close. But she was in her 80s. And I was very conscious, because I mean, years of recording oral testimony, going to see older people. You're I mean, probably younger than I am now, but you're cautious, particularly if they're the opposite sex. So you always try and have some intermediary or some reason, someone that you've introduced you. And in this case, I thought I really ought to think of someone, and I happened to mention it to Ray Fisher. One day, and she said, "Oh, can I come?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that'll be great." And she said, "Well, come up to my place, stay the night, and we'll drive up the next day." So it all fitted in beautifully. So we drove up. We got to Mintlaw, where she lived, and there's this tiny bungalow. We got there at midday, and we went in, and in fact, I started filming immediately. We started filming just a few minutes after midday. I'm on camera saying, "Hang on a moment, I'll just go and get a tripod." And she says, "I'll make some tea." Came back into the house, so there was a gap of 5 minutes. But from then on, I filmed for 7 hours. And she sang 70, 80 songs. But they went from Dancing with My Shadow, yodeling, um, cowboy songs, Vera Lynn songs. But she started singing a 35-verse ballad. We never did get that cup of tea because it went black, of course, while she was singing. But that was her, and she talked and sang all day long, and she danced. But she was disabled. She'd either had an accident very early on, which is what she said, or she was born disabled with shortened legs, so she was on crutches. But my God, could she sing and dance in a little way? And I filmed her regularly over, I don't know how many years now, so hours and hours of stuff. And I said, why was I telling you that?
I don't know, but did she ever make it to the National?
No, she never did. Only on film.
But she made it there on film.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's because we were talking about the travellers and whether people travelled and their lifestyle at that point. So Margaret Bennett's just sort of put on the Q&A, just sort of saying, did you know Willie Macphee? Which I'm pretty sure that you did know Willie Macphee. And of course he never lived in a house.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time I saw him, I don't know how Duncan knew he was there, but we pulled into a lay-by on Skye and went to see him and visited him there.
Yeah, I met once in a caravan, and there was stories about a ghostly piper and things as well. Quite amazing. But yeah, I mean, it just sheer accident. I was going to say that Jane Turreth's niece, Elizabeth Stewart, lives probably about 10 houses away. And I once went up with Alison McMorland to record Elizabeth for a project for the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, and they've changed their title since. And she asked me to get down on the floor of the car as we went past Jane Turreth's house, and because apparently they didn't speak. But part way through the one of the recordings, the interview, I asked Elizabeth if she sang a certain song, and she said, "No, that's my Auntie Jane's." And then the second line was she said, "You know Auntie Jane." And I think Alison dived under a sofa because she thought something was going to happen. And I said, "Yes, how is she?" "Oh, fine, I haven't seen her for a while," but there was no problem at all. So, but I had to get down on the floor of the car. But I mean, once when I went round, knowing that the two of them were there, I actually went a long way round so that I didn't go past Elizabeth's house for the same reason. I didn't want to be showing affection for one and not the other.
Oh, yes, you need to keep straight. Yes, travellers will remember things like that. I think people will.
I was just thinking of Ray. I mean, Ray Fisher was an extraordinary. I mean, I must have met Ray in the early 60s, but she kind of respected the fact that I could do these things, record and photograph. And Willie Scott, again, an amazing raconteur, so come storyteller. I interviewed him a number of times, I think at the National and such like, and Ray was determined to get all his songs and his stories down. So one, I think it was October, but one year he came and stayed at our place in London, and they were doing, I think, 3 or 4 clubs. So I recorded those in the evening, but during the day did some small video interviews, I'm talking about, of Willie. And the most dramatic one was on a Saturday. Decided to do it, spend the Saturday doing some recordings. And people kept dropping in because they knew that Ray and Willie were there. Started recording at midday. And there were cups of tea coming and going, so there's a slight interruption. I remember Stephanie Smith from the Smithsonian was there as well, doing some recording early in the day. So it was quite a party-like atmosphere. And the day went on, and people went home. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I was on my own with Willie. He was still full flight. And at least 3 times I said, right, Willie, you're performing tomorrow. Shall we stop? No, no, no. I'll try anything twice, save hanging, he said. So we carried on filming. And I always remember at one point, it was about 2 in the morning. I packed up the equipment again. And he said to me, because Willie had this fantastic, really rich voice, border voice. And he said, do you know Sheila McGregor? And I said, Sheila Stewart. Aye. And he said, I said, yeah, Sheila McGregor Stewart. And he said, aye. He said, Travellers, And I said, yeah, yeah. He said, they're all liars. And I said, what? So I said, I'm not letting you get away with that. I took out the camera, plugged it all in again. And he said, they're all liars. And I said, come on then, tell me. And he then recounted the story of the changeling child that he'd heard Sheila do. About the child, the screaming, sent off the wifey to get whiskey. And then this woman put the child on a shovel and stuck it up the chimney, and it exploded, and everything was all right. Anyway, Willie told this with, spluttering and gasping, and said, "Sure, it put it on, it stuck it up the lum. Yeah, what do you think of that? What do you do?" And he was reciting it third person as if to say, what a load of rubbish, what a load of liars. What was interesting, I found later, that he told it in exactly the same order as Sheila did, and almost to the same second. And he was testing me out, saying, isn't this rubbish? Isn't this nonsense? And at the same time, he was thoroughly enjoying telling the story.
Or just using it as a blanket.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I mean, at that time, because obviously travellers do come in for an awful lot of prejudice and name calling and all sorts of things. And then kind of at the same time, you've got these artists who are being celebrated. I mean, did you witness them? Apart from Willie, did you see that at any time at kind of festivals and things? This kind of dual-edged nature of things.
Well, I think we were all accepting. I mean, we were grateful that there were people performing these songs, the stories, and all the rest of it. So,
I mean, that's how I hope it was, So I did wonder.
And that, in essence, was the reason the National Folk Music Festival ran. We as younger performers would come and do our lot for free, virtually, or accommodation and travel, and any money that was made from ticket sales from punters, that would be distributed to the older performers. And of course, it got to a point where I think you suddenly realise the older performers were dying out, and the younger performers were actually there, and we were the old ones looking at the youngsters instead of the other way around, And then there were other problems with accommodation. With, I think, the place they held, the National, was part owned by a Japanese company, and they extended the students' accommodation through the year, so there was no Easter break sort of thing. And it's one of the greatest sadnesses, really, that we lost the National. John Hayden used to run it, single-handedly. And a lot of the recordings I made of singers, of course, was at the National. So there is a huge component of the archive that is National Folk Music Festival, and he had
just fabulous. You were there, so you've got all of those years of those different singers. I mean, just wonderful.
Yeah.
Did you notice? I'm going to keep taking you back to the Travellers. I'm sorry. But did you notice a big difference? Because I mean, you are one of the people as well that's got to really record. I think most people would record people on stage or at home, but not necessarily both. And I think you got to, obviously, kind of, you were sort of saying with Jane and things, you went to people's houses and you recorded them at home and got a lot of that material, but then you also saw them in a performance setting. And I'm quite interested in if you notice much difference, or if they did just kind of be the same in different places.
No, I mean, one of the things I think I was saying to you the other day, that a lot of the really rich vernacular performers, singers, storytellers, one of the great things was that I noticed in the early days that their style, their dynamic, their speech would not change whether they're telling you about their bus journey or telling you a jack tale. And I think that's changed. I think the younger performers are almost like putting the hat on as a storyteller to tell a tale. Whereas as the older performers tended to just to be, it was just part of, it was almost a surprise sometime when you suddenly realize for 10 minutes they've been telling you a story, because it's exactly the same tone as we're talking now, perhaps.
Do you think there's a little bit of age and experience that comes in with that as well? Because I think generally you do kind of get young performers who tend to be a bit more brash and kind of bouncing around and kind of and in your face and everything, and then you kind of calm down as you get a little bit older. And certainly I know from my experience that the kind of the performers that I was drawn to when I was sort of 15, 16 are very different to the ones that I want to listen to now. And I mean, I remember the first time I heard Fred Jordan thinking, oh God, being sort of lured into the breaking Acadia. I've got to listen to this old bloke droning on. And then, of course, 5 years later, I was like first there to take my seat going, Fred, yes! Because I got it. But it took me a little while to get it. And I kind of have watched quite a lot of people. I think, people do maybe realise the value of their own voice as they get older.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head, first of all, because you said performers on the stage. I mean, that's their platform. So let's call them younger, newer performers. Their performance stage is a folk club or a theatre or an art centre. So it is a performance before you even start.
Mm.
And I do think as well that I think true vernacular performance style, if it's a song, a story, or whatever, there are no prima donnas. They're not out to outdo another performer or do better than they ever have done before. It's different each time, and that can be created by an audience. One person, 10 people, or the rest of it. But there's the feedback. Which a lot of, if you're on a stage with a microphone and you can't see an audience, there is no way of actually having that feedback.
Yeah.
But I do think the point is that's the easiest way of saying it. There are no prima donnas because rather like Fred Jordan, the song was important. You start the song, you sing every verse, and you finish it. Then start the next one. You don't waste time introducing the song. I mean, Jill Pitt, my partner, she also would always sing the song and not mention it at all. But in recent years, she's realised there's a social element and also information to give. And so she's now learned, and very, very well actually, how to introduce a song. And it's quite fascinating. If Fred Jordan had introduced songs, I think it would have been really wonderful, because he was
as well
an extraordinarily educated man. I mean, his knowledge of history, and even though he lived in this house with no electricity, no hot water, no radio, he said he's got a transistor radio, but the batteries went. And he was happy to read his books. And I said, what books you like? And he said, history, anything history is great. And he really was knowledgeable. Actually, while I think about Fred, I'll just tell you a wonderful story.
Before we go too much further, I'm just wondering, because I'm also looking at the time, all of that you've been saying about kind of that vernacular and just talking in your usual voice. One of the things that you sent me was Betsy Whyte, who is just an extraordinary storyteller. But we maybe won't play the whole. I mean, I'd love to play the whole story. I'm not sure the sound is good enough. It's a bit long, but I think if we play the beginning of that story, it's just a perfect example of what you were talking about. Is this a good time to do that?
Yeah.
Right. Let me. Oh, where's Betsy? I've got so many flipping chats and things up on here. I can't see Betsy for it all being in the way.
Just below middle second.
There she is. will start in a minute.
Well, that piper and the whiskey takes me back to my community in the Highlands of Perthshire, a travelling community. And this is a fairy story, a true fairy story. So if it is a lie from me, it was a lie to me. It happened when my mother was about 7 years old, and travelling people in the winter, when the ground was hard and no work could be done on it, they had no means of getting food or money. So the men, they used to make tinware. At that time, every poor and even middle-class families used a lot of tinware, basins, cans, mugs, teapots, and all sorts of things were made of tin. So the men made tin, and the women went out to sell it. Now my granny had 21 of a family, so you can imagine her predicament trying to feed them all. But anyway, she got her hank of tin on her back, and she sets out to try and sell it or exchange it for food. And she took my mother with her. And they went on the road and on the road, and they took every house that was at the side of the road and everyone up off the road, farms and every places. But there had been somebody there the day before, and nobody needed any tinware. So she said, now this was further up than Perthshire, right up in the Glens of Argyllshire, where houses were scarce and far between. So she said to my mother, I'm afraid you'll all be going hungry to bed tonight. She said, there's only one last hope. There's a young shepherd's wife, and she never puts me away from the door without giving me something. Do you think you could walk another mile? My mother nodded. She was hardly able to speak by this time. So up they went, and as they walked up, my granny kept telling my mother, the last time I was to see this girl, she was expecting a baby. And you'll see a wee baby when you go up. Telling her things to keep her happy, you see, and keep away the tiredness.
So I'd love to play the whole of that, because it's just a fabulous story. But I mean, it's just Betsy being completely Betsy. And I mean, I've got audio recordings of her that are just sat in her room, and she sounds absolutely exactly the same. Would it be all right for me to put that up on the YouTube channel, so that if people want to, they can watch the whole story?
Sure. I mean, I'll make sure you've got a decent format, because that's really jerky, and it's not like that at all in the original, of course. Yeah, I mean, I met Betsy. I did say earlier that 1979, I suddenly realised I had all this material, and it was a few years after that I realised I needed some filing cabinets and things like that. So I better get a job, and I came down to London, had an interview for a job, and I managed to arrange it to coincide with an event at the Commonwealth Institute where Betsy Whyte was, and along with Taffy Thomas and various people. And I'd been asked to put up an exhibition of photographs of some of the performers. So I went, did the interview, came along that evening, and Taffy introduced me to Betsy Whyte. She was in a small cupboard having a cup of tea. And I went in, she immediately grabbed my hand and started reading my palm. And it was frighteningly accurate. And she knew about the job. And she knew that I'd been looking for a new job, and I was going to get it. And when I got back to where I was staying, there was a phone call that I'd got the job. She was quite amazing. I met her about 3 or 4 times in all. But,
Peter Marlowe saying that's when he was there. He was there at that time. Joint memories. And that thing, you know, sort of Margaret Bennett saying, you know, Ray, the change of style to a more expansive stage style, with narration more dramatic. She remembers a huge change in Duncan's style, which sort of the tapes that I've been listening to and my knowledge of kind of touring with him, he had definitely kind of worked on stagecraft by that point. You know, before then he'd been entirely kind of, you know, by the fire in a small group, and he started putting these expressions like, and ladies and gentlemen, do you know what happened next, and things like that. He never did that before. And yeah, Duncan did definitely like to be centre stage.
Yeah, I've got quite a range of recordings of Duncan. I mean, it was at St Donat's Arts Storytelling Festival. I was on stage with him and Chris Wood, and the theme was horses. So we all had to produce songs and stories about horses. And the following morning, he and I started swapping stories. I've actually got a couple of Duncan stories that I tell in Broad Devon now, you know, that I learned from him, and I suspect he must have taken my stories and talking in Scots. But there is a very different, deliberate style. When he's working with children as well, the stories are the same, but the approach is different, as any human being would do, I suspect. But one of the nice things is, I think you've got the clip, he appeared at the, I found the poster earlier, the third International Storytelling Festival in November 1989. In London at the South Bank, and he found out that I was filming in the audience, and he said, "Tell me where you are," and he actually wanted me to show him where I was sitting. And if you look at the performance, there's the microphone, but he's talking directly at the camera. It was very unnerving because he was performing to me.
Which one was it?
I've
got two that you sent me.
Yeah, the one with Duncan I sent you. I think I only sent one.
There's two here. No, you sent me two. So there's one where he's playing the jaw harp at the beginning, and there's the one where Jack goes back to school and he's talking about Jack.
No, it's the one with the jaws harp. Just you could inch that through a few minutes. In fact, you could take it through quite a way.
Now, in this great land of ours, in England and Scotland, of course, we have respect for old books, old paintings, old art of all kinds, but we don't have any respect for old age. So all you young people here tonight, just listen carefully to this story, because someday it will be your turn to be old. Now remember, because you see, my story takes you, ladies and gentlemen, to a long time ago, to an old farmer away up the north of Scotland. He was very, very poor. He had a small hill farm with a wife and a baby son. And he worked from dawn to dark to make ends meet. His poor wife, she laboured hard and toiled to scrape together a little food to keep them alive, because he had very little money. He had a few sheep, a couple of cows, one old horse, very poor. He gave up his friends. He gave up everything. He never went to the village. He never had a glass of beer. He just worked from dawn till dark, because he said to himself, someday, when my son grows up, he will need somewhere to live. He will need a good farm to live on, and I will put myself to the grave for my son.
Yeah, I can see absolutely what you mean there. He is. I mean, he's totally kind of the microphone. He's like that with the microphone, isn't he? You've got so many questions coming in as well. Just to sort of open it up a little. So I mean, Jocelyn is sort of saying, you know, what do you consider to be a storyteller, Doc? As someone who's not a performer but a real recounter of true tales, and you're saying, you know, you kind of tell some of Duncan's stories as well. He said, do you think a recounter of true tales is the best storyteller? Jocelyn, you might be starting a bit of an argument in the chat here. We'll see what happens. But what do you think, Doc?
I'm not sure about the question.
Well, just she's wondering what you would call her to be a real storyteller. Obviously, I'm coming from the traditional story camp, but I don't have. I like true stories and traditional stories put together. I mean, I think
absolutely.
Personally, I think Betsy was ahead of her time.
Said, and I think Margaret Bennett also said, you know, that things have to change when you're on the stage. I mean, you put a camera in front of somebody. To perform into a camera, that can have an effect as well. But if you're filming them just doing a normal performance, I mean, I sent you that clip of John Campbell. John Campbell was an Irish storyteller, looked like an accountant or a solicitor, always dressed extremely well, and but came out with these amazing stories. And I had this privilege of spending a week with him and Len Graham in Devon while they were on their way to Sidmouth Folk Festival. And partway through the week, a local vicar had engaged them to do a show. And we met in the cafe, a tea shop, at lunchtime to discuss the evening's performance. And I remember John saying, "Is he the local vicar? Is he the one that's booked us?" And I said, "Yes, he is." "Ah." And he went quiet for a minute and said, "Got it." And so that evening, all of the protagonists, if that's the best word to use, became vicars or ecclesiastical persons. It was really good, and it was. I mean, he didn't falter once, but all the characters, instead of being what they were, farmers in another evening, they became vicars. He really enjoyed it, and that's that. I think the other thing I was going to mention. I said to you the other day that there is. When you record somebody talking about their life, they'll try to start off saying, "Well, I was born in so and so," but then they'll meander, and they'll go off, and they're suddenly at work, and then they're teenagers, and then they're older people, and there is no chronological order. And I think that's the other thing about storytelling, that I think I'm saying that a good storyteller will have this repertoire, almost a vocabulary, and things will come out, and it doesn't necessarily, that same story will come out, one night it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, another night it'll be 3, 1, 2, and so on. And I think that's the way that it's exciting. It's actually getting the listener to work as hard as the storyteller sometimes. And you find that a good storyteller is almost questioning the whole time. Duncan does this quite a lot. He's checking that he's making sense to you. He's checking that you're enjoying it, and it's all part of the storytelling. And the narrative order doesn't matter, and sometimes it's a surprise when you get to the end. And I suppose in a sense I'm talking from long conversations with people like Charles Parker, who I remember one evening, well, early hours of the morning actually, with my parents upstairs sleeping, we were getting excited about ballads, traditional ballads, and storytelling in the same format. That it's almost like a Hitchcock movie, because something comes up, and then something almost unrelated comes up next to it, and you go, "What?" And it only makes sense maybe a verse or two on what this second line. And what we were talking about was Charlie's favourite song was "The Grey Cock." And what happens there is exactly the same as in storytelling. It starts off, and "I must be going, can no longer tarry, the burning Thames I have to cross." So it's first person, I am going across. And you say, what's the burning Thames? In a time when, the lingua franca was such, you would probably guess, why is the Thames burning to someone? He must be, therefore, right? If you don't know that, it comes later in the story. The second verse says, "And when he has come to," so it's third person telling you that he's got across the burning Thames. He's now at his true love's window. The third verse is from his girlfriend's. So all the way there's tense changing, and I think you do that. You're conjuring up, as Charles Parker would say, you're conjuring up the memories, the story, the place, the colours. In fact, there's a beauty for you. Jane Turriff said to me, I said, she sang a 35-verse ballad. And I said, "How do you remember all that?" Teasing, really. And she said, "Well, I see it. I see it in my mind's eye." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Aye." And she said, "It's like television, Coronation Street, but better." And I said, and do you see it in colour?" And she said, "Aye, aye. I see the boy with his yellow shirt and his waistcoat, and I see that, really quite, assertive." When I asked Sheila Stewart the same, a year or two later, I said, "So Sheila, how do you remember?" "I see it. And I said, so you see, she said, I see all the, I see, so you see the characters and the dresses and all the rest of it. And I said, and you see it in colour? And she got really cross and said, no, it's old, it's crinolines and things like that, it's all black and white, which is fabulous, isn't it? So whenever I talk to a story as a storyteller or a singer, I'll almost teasing say, how do you remember these things? I mean, do you see it? And they say exactly that.
That doesn't seem a revelation to me at all. I just assume that is how else could you possibly remember it? And it's
there's this variation as well, because sometimes you're searching for the next scene, if you like, and you sometimes will bring in a prop, a verbal prop to help you on the way, and that happens as well. It's quite nice to analyze stories and to actually take one story from one. I mean, rather like singers, to record them year 1 and then year 10 and see how things have changed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you change. A person changes so much within 10 years that you're bound to see things differently, because you see different things and the story means different things to you at different times in your life. I mean, I definitely kind of, and that's been one of the interesting things for me, is kind of going back and looking at these things from Duncan again, is I have a totally different perspective on the stories than I did, 20 years ago, because my life experience is completely different. But Patrick Ryan's saying some of the Donegal storytellers and fiddlers he's spoken to about it reconstruct a story by remembering it orally, and it's the rhythm and the feel rather than the sing. And that's true. I mean, I'm definitely kind of, I think, a visual person, but I think a lot of people do. And I know somebody like Janet Dowling, who's had a stroke and now has to remember it by the rhythm and the feel, because she can't visualize anymore because that part of her brain doesn't work in the same way. And but I think everybody, people tend to have a dominant sense, don't they? That different people kind of do think and receive better in, and that's how they interpret the world.
Yeah, it is surprising. I mean, I sing occasionally, and there's one song where it's almost like a Bertolt Brecht stage play. There's just a panel and a box in my black stage, and I have the whole sort of scenario, the sort of the sailor and his true love and the window and everything, and it's just a flat panel, a corrugated panel, and a wooden box on a black stage. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? That's all I need every time. Oh, just tell a story. I mentioned Fred earlier, and then Pat Ryan. Hiya, Pat. We were at the National one year, and I was emceeing, and I had Norma Waterson on my left. Fred Jordan on my left and Norma Waterson next to him. And we were running reasonably well, and I saw Pat standing in the door, and I thought, oh, put Pat on for one. We've got the time. So I introduced him, a friend from London, a great storyteller, blah, blah, blah. So he came up and started talking. And I suppose the distance between us as the performers and Pat was about 6-7 feet, and about 3 feet in front was the front row of the audience. Anyway, Pat starts talking or telling a story, I guess, and Fred says, and I listen, because I'm deaf in one ear, so he was on my good ear, and said, Fred, and he said, what are you doing with my ear? And I said, storyteller, Fred. What are you going to start singing? I said, he's a storyteller, Fred. Eh? And I said, and he went on, and by that time Norma was shifting very uncomfortably, and the front row were grinning evilly, and I think Pat could hear anyway because he glanced backwards. And I finally said in a very loud whisper, he's a storyteller, Fred. And he said the wonderful line that Jill and I say quite often now. He says, "Poor, they should have their own festivals."
And we did, and we invited him. Oh, Pat, I feel for you. Yes, I do remember being in a concert at Whitby next to Stanley, and probably valuing Stanley's opinion probably more than most, than the audience, not to disrespect the audience, but kind of Stanley, great, the wonderful Stanley, and he sat next to me and gave a running commentary on all the other performers in the concert. At which point I kind of can't really tell Stanley Robertson to shut up, but at the same time we're on the stage behind the performers with 300 people in front of us going, yes, Stanley. And he wasn't particularly he was very blunt. So yes, but I think that's one of the great things about Stanley and Fred and Duncan and all of those, is they didn't really pull any punches, and you did know what they thought at any particular given moment.
Yeah. Amazing.
That is such a wonderful story about Fred, Doc, and there's so many things that I want to ask you. We are running short of time, and I'm just looking through the chat. There's a couple of things that I'd really like to come back to and ask, and the first is so Fiona McDoodle is asking, have you recorded any of the Gaelic speaking travellers?
No. I had Margaret Bennett, I think you said, was there, and Margaret and I went to see a most wonderful woman who basically was on her deathbed. I mean, she was decided that there she would die, and she was a Hebridean singer, had been recorded in the 1950s, and the most stunning, Kitty MacLeod, the most stunning looking woman ever. And sadly, although I asked, she wouldn't let me take a photograph. And as Margaret will remember, the recording was amazing, because she was clearly satisfied with me, and Margaret she knew anyway, and pleased to be recorded. But she went from the Gaelic into English and back again. Wonderful stories about bundling, and Margaret saying, "Oh, I got a photo after." Brilliant. But she was
She's the first Gaelic woman on film.
It's probably in her 90s, is that right, Margaret? And I mean, the most wonderful experience. 88, thank you. Yes. So I mean, it's I keep saying it. I think it is a privilege. I mean, I've been welcomed into people's home and been lucky to sit literally at the knee, because I always wanted to get down lower than them. That's again something I learned from Charles Parker, but he was 6'4", needed to, and literally sit at the feet of and record people. It's a privilege, and I suppose I now have this responsibility, as I said at the beginning, to make sure this stuff is safe and is getting. We've got a program going at the moment that I don't tempt fate, but there's a possibility of some severe funding, if that's the right word, because digitizing, absolutely, everyone's fingers crossed, and hopefully soon I'll be able to mention this publicly. But
this is quite public.
Yes. Doc,
it
is quite public.
It is quite public, Doc. If you don't want to say it publicly, maybe stop.
know who the association is with and all the rest of it. So, but if it happens, it will be fantastic.
Oh, well, yes, prayers all round, absolutely, because it's such an important archive. And I mean, one of the things that must be amazing is, I mean, like today you sent me that wonderful, wonderful recording of Betsy, and I got in touch with her grandson to say that I was going to be putting it on, and if he was all right with that, and if he'd seen it. And he got it, and he had never seen Betsy on video, and he was absolutely over the moon to have it. So and I'm just going to give him a quick plug, actually, because when we were on Betsy, David G. Pullett, and he's just recorded put out a children's picture book, Wee Bessie, that came out on what would have been her 100th birthday. So it's a lovely picture book, so I do recommend it if you've got smalls. But I mean, that thing of being able to give that back to it's their family, but you're the one who's kind of entrusted with their family memories.
And can I say that I met David in a field many years ago and then lost his connection. But he came to a show I did in Aberdeen just before lockdown, at the beginning of March, and unfortunately, for some reason, Betsy had fallen off my reel. So I went. He was rather surprised that I remembered him anyway. But David, thank you for the book, and I will get you the complete Betsy Whyte film in good quality very soon.
Well, it's 25 past 9. I'm just looking to see if there's any other really, really desperate questions. I mean, there's been quite. I apologise that I haven't read out everything on the chat because there's so many wonderful comments on the chat, and I'm going to be saving this, and I hope you don't mind if I kind of keep some of these comments, and they'll be going into my Arts Council. I mean, these lovely comments from Patrick Ryan and from Jocelyn about and Margaret Bennett about Duncan, and I really appreciate all of those. But it is time for us to be wrapping up, and I knew that this would be a really tricky one, so I made this officially a little bit longer, an hour and a half tonight, because I knew we'd be trying to squeeze everything in. So what we will do is put up some of the stories on the YouTube. I've got the links there, but I don't think Doc's going to let me put it what I've got at the moment. He'd rather have the high quality ones. We'll have some high quality stuff up, which may take a little bit of time, hopefully not too long. As I said, I've only got 2 more Taking the Traditions on in this series. So next week, Heather Yule is on the chat. She's with us tonight, the marvellous Heather Yule. And Mike Rust and Joseph Sobel have all been recent guests on Taking the Tradition on. And we keep talking about Jack stories and not having time to actually tell any. So next week is a Jack Cayley, and we're going to have the 4 of us, and we're all going to tell a Jack tale and talk about Jack's place in the tradition, because it's just such an important bit of all stories, in particular traveller stories. And then the week after that, I'm going to invite you all back. Please come, and we'll have that'll be the time when I can actually look at all the stuff on the chat, and we can have a proper discussion about what the tradition is, where do we think it's going. Maybe we can talk about Sam Lee then. So that is what is coming up, and those will be advertised on Facebook and my website. But I'm going to hand back over to Doc for the end, because I know that there is something that you wanted to talk about and share to bring this together. You're now looking very worried, but you've got this wonderful, wonderful clip of Sheila.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was or would have been Sheila's birthday earlier this month, and I pulled up a clip which I've put on. Well, I think it's just on Facebook at the moment, but I will put it onto that other thing, YouTube. But are you able to play that then?
I am able to play it. I was going to let you talk about it first. So you just tell me when you want me to put it up.
Pete Shepherd's name there, and it was Pete Shepherd had invited Jill and I up to Fife Sings in 2010, and Jill shared the stage most of the weekend with Sheila, and in fact one day they went off together and had jolly chats for nearly all day, I seem to remember. But this was an extraordinary. I mean, I've seen Sheila sing this song so many times, but this was a particularly great experience, and I suppose I'm pleased, but at the same time, I did upset quite a few people because I included some footage in it that I'd shot about 40 years before, and it did shake a few people. But if that's the one you're going to show, then show it. I think it's a good way of saying good night and farewell. And thank you, folks, for well, if you've been listening. I mean,
they have had lots of people. People have stayed all the way through, and people I think would like to hear a lot more. And I'm just going to say, so just before we go, what if you just have a few sentences maybe about why you think Scottish travellers are important and what they've kind of given to seasonal traditions and the traditional scene in Britain? Big question for a few sentences.
No, I mean, clearly there's been a strength, a determination, not only for their stories and songs and music, but the fact that they're actually travelling fraternity, and you know, against all the odds, they've continued, and I think that gives the material strength as well that probably wouldn't have had anywhere else. And the fact that they're travelling and sharing also adds you know, salt and pepper to the mix. If that makes sense.
It absolutely does. So thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you very much for all of your comments. It's been a joy. Gosh, there's another 19 messages. So just thank you for all of these lovely, lovely comments. I'm going to save all of this. Jocelyn, if you know Doc, then I will make sure that you have my contact and we can tag you into things for the next week. So it'd be great if you want to come back. And I will save all of this. And as I say, I will pass it on to Doc so that he can read all your comments. He won't have got to see them now, but I will pass them all on. And let's get Sheila up, which is the perfect way to end pretty much any event, really, and how she would always end every event.
Oh, I didn't tell the story about the bus ride to Sheila's.
No, well.
Is it a quick one? Do you want to do it before we play the song?
There's a minute or two.
Good, go for it.
Sheila, very, very early on confided to me that she trusted me to record all the stuff, and she would like one day for me to record all the songs, all the stories, and so on. And so I arranged several times to go up and see her. And Peter Webb, I think, heard that I was going up and told Tony Engels of Topic that I was going to do this. Tony got in touch and said, ask her if she wants to do a CD, because she never has a solo CD. And I said, well, fine, knowing Sheila that, that financial return would be really useful. And I said, what are you after? And he said, well, ballads would be great. So that was a surprise as well. Anyway, I set off from Edinburgh, and I got a bus, and I got another bus, and so on. And I'm on the bus. I'll try and shorten this as far as I can, but I'm on the bus, and somebody said, good morning, are you on holiday? And I said, well, no, I'm actually going off to record a Scottish singer. Oh, who is? And I said, well, a lady called Sheila Stewart. And she said, do you mean Sheila McGregor? And I said, I do. And she turned to somebody across the bus, and suddenly the 4 or 5 people on the bus all knew Sheila McGregor, right? The bus driver turned around and said, Are you going to see Sheila McGregor? And I said, Sheila Stewart, yes. And he said, you no want this bus? I don't. No. He said, never mind, I'll put you off to get another bus. So anyway, he dropped me off at a bridge, this tiny bridge. I must find out where the town was. And he said, there'll be a bus in about 5 or 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes went by, and I thought, this is a wind-up, and no bus is going to stop on a bridge anyway. And sure enough, a bus came along, the door opened, he said, are you the wee man that's recording Sheila McGregor? And I said, I am. And I got on, I proffered money. He said, no, you sit down. And I sat down, and people on the bus started to say, oh, how is she, and all the rest. Did you know her mother? And anyway, suddenly the bus stops, and he said, you're here, young man, you're here. And I said, got up and said cheerio to this people that I'd met and waved them. The bus went by, and there was Sheila across the road looking out the window. And I thought, great, cross the road, and she's out on the doorstep looking after the bus. And she said, what, the bus, what? And I said, yeah, everyone knows you. They said, but the bus doesn't stop here. And his busman had taken me right the way around. And anyway, we recorded the songs and the stories. What I did, I went into what was Rob Roy's bedroom, stuffed a single mattress in the window so it was soundproofed, and we started at 9 o'clock. Sheila's decided she wanted to do it that evening, and we finished somewhere around 2 in the morning. And I'd recorded, I think, 19 or 20 songs and ballads with the speech in between. So I've got the whole family history, which is really quite exciting. Got up the next morning, and with a couple of matchsticks, I managed to patch my DAT machine into her radio so she could hear some of what she'd recorded. And she accepted all of them. And she thought, the singing was all right. Just one she wanted to do again. And then she says, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, no, it must be earlier than that, 12 o'clock, shall we do the stories now? So we started the stories. And at one point, she said, what time's your bus? Because I was going off to Macphee. And I said, oh, yes, thanks, it's 10 to 7. She said, it's 22 now. And so I throwing my stuff in the bag. I'm running down the road because the bus is actually at the end of the road, not on that road. And I'm running down the road with headphones bouncing out of the bag and microphones bouncing up and down. I get to the bus stop, the doors open, and do you know, the busman said, "Are you the man recording Sheila Stewart?" The short version.
Oh, wonderful. Right.
Sheila.
Oh, so much for my quick and speedy, perfect now sharing. Where's it gone? It's vanished. I've completely lost it. There it is.
Oh, kind friends and companions, come join me in rhyme and lift up your voices and the chorus with mine. Let's drink and be merry all through the day. For we may all night never all meet again. Oh, now here's to the wee lass that I love so well. For style and for beauty, there's none that can excel. She smiles on me proudly as she sits on my knee. And there is none in this wide world as a happy as me. So here's a health to the lonely, likewise to us. Let's drink and be merry, all of one glass. Let's drink and be merry, all through to the grave. For we may all night never all meet again. Oh, my ship lies in harbour, she's ready to sail. God grant her safe voyage without any gale. And if we should meet again